Mafia wife invited her black maid to a party as a joke, but she arrived carrying a $2 million handbag. Kamaria Mensah pressed a cloth into the corner of the marble foyer on her hands and knees, her reflection broken and warped in the polished stone beneath her. 28 years old. CEO of Mensah Holdings, a global logistics and data security empire headquartered in Accra and Dubai. Net worth, somewhere north of the GDP of a small nation. Playing Maid. You missed a corner, Ji-eun Kang said, stepping around her without slowing down, wine glass tilted lazily in one hand, phone pressed to the other. Kamaria knelt lower and wiped the spot again. Not because she had to. Because she was still watching. Ji-eun stopped at the foot of the staircase, glancing back with the kind of smile that had been sharpened into a weapon over many years of practice. Oh, Kamaria. She said the name the way people say and another thing. I'm hosting my birthday charity party tomorrow night. You should come. Kamaria looked up slowly. Ji-eun's smile widened. Pure silk. Pure poison. Wear something appropriate. My friends have never seen house staff at one of my galas before. It'll be charming. Laughter erupted from the hallway. Ji-eun's friends, designer bags propped on their arms, fresh manicures catching the chandelier light, had been watching the whole time. Cinderella, one of them whispered, barely lowering her voice, with no shoes. More laughter. Kamaria nodded once, eyes down, and went back to cleaning. But in her mind, she was already making a phone call. Bring the bag, she was thinking. The crocodile Birkin. The $2 million one. Not because she needed to impress anyone. Because Ji-eun Kang had spent 3 months looking directly at her, and had never once actually seen her. Tomorrow night, she would finally look. 3 months earlier. Kamaria had walked through the Kang estate service entrance carrying a bucket of cleaning supplies and wearing a faded gray uniform she'd sourced through a domestic employment agency in Seoul. No jewelry. No makeup. Her hair tied back tight. Her accent, flattened, deliberate, invisible. The agency coordinator had glanced at her paperwork twice. Ms. Mensah, this is an entry-level domestic position. Live-in housekeeping. You're certain? I'm certain, Kamaria said. What the coordinator didn't know, what no one in that house knew, was that Kamaria hadn't come because she needed work. She had come because Mensah Holdings had a problem. 6 months earlier, In-ho Kang, the head of the Kang crime syndicate and owner of Kang Shipping, had submitted a proposal for a joint port infrastructure venture. The numbers were impressive. The paperwork was clean. But Kamaria's intelligence team had flagged something beneath the surface, whispered connections to ghost shipments, shell accounts, coded logistics routes that didn't match any legitimate cargo. The contract on the table was worth hundreds of millions. She could have sent lawyers. She could have hired investigators. Instead, she went herself. If I'm going to understand who In-ho Kang really is, I need to see his world with my own eyes. So she entered it through the back door. 3 months in, she had learned a great deal. In-ho Kang ran an operation that was far more sophisticated than it appeared, legitimate shipping masking carefully constructed concealment. But the man himself was measured. Disciplined. There were signs, real, fragile signs, that he was trying to build something clean. His wife was a different matter entirely. Ji-eun Kang treated the household staff as set decoration. She never learned their names unless she was correcting them. She threw away food Kamaria had touched. She made her pronounce words repeatedly in front of guests, then laughed when she got it right. She announced at a luncheon, to a table full of politicians' wives, "My husband feeds entire villages. You people should be grateful to work here." Kamaria kept her eyes down and memorized everything. The hidden rooms, the late-night phone calls, the coded language buried inside shipping manifests left carelessly on the study desk. She endured it all in silence. That was the job. Then Sung-hyun found her. In-ho's head of personal security had been watching Kamaria for weeks before he finally said anything. He cornered her near the wine cellar the night before the party, arms crossed, voice low. "You're not poor," he said simply. Kamaria paused, cloth in hand. Sung-hyun studied her the way a man studies something he's been trying to name. "I've spent my whole career guarding people who are afraid of losing what they have. Fear has a particular smell." He tilted his head. "You don't have it." Kamaria met his eyes for the first time since she'd entered the house. "I'm here to understand who your employer really is," she said quietly. "Whether what I've heard about him changing is true, or just better concealment." Sung-hyun was silent for a long moment. Then he stepped aside. "Then tomorrow," he said, "will be very interesting. So let's pause right here." Kamaria Mensah, CEO, billionaire, owner of a $2 million handbag sitting in a hotel room across the city, has just been invited to a party as a joke. Ji-eun Kang thinks she's inviting her maid. She has absolutely no idea what's about to walk through those doors. Drop a diamond in the comments if you already know this evening is going to destroy Ji-eun's entire world. And if you're new here, hit subscribe and turn on notifications, because Korean Mafia tales is where the powerful meet people they never should have underestimated. You do not want to miss what happens next. Because Kwame is already on his way with the bag. Sung-hyun has chosen a side. And In-ho Kang is about to hear a name that will change everything. The gala starts at 9. Kamaria arrives at 9:17. But to understand what truly happened the night Kamaria Mensah walked into that heritage hall above the Han River, you need to go back to the beginning. Back to the day she stepped through a service entrance in a faded gray uniform, carrying a bucket and a plan that no one in that house could have imagined. Mensah Holdings didn't begin with venture capital or a family fortune. It began with a shipping container. Kamaria's father, a logistics broker in Accra, had spent 20 years moving other people's cargo across West Africa, always the middleman, never the owner. When he died, he left Kamaria two things: a single refrigerated container unit and a leather notebook filled with trade routes, port contacts, and one handwritten line on the inside cover. "The person who understands movement controls everything." She was 19. By 23, she had turned that one container into a regional freight operation. By 26, Mensah Holdings had absorbed 3 mid-sized logistics firms and opened a data security division in Dubai. The company now touched ports on 4 continents. She had built it by knowing one thing that most CEOs never learn. Paper lies. People don't, not when they think no one important is watching. Audits could be engineered. Financial statements could be sculpted. Lawyers could make criminal enterprises look like philanthropies, given enough time and the right letterhead. Kamaria had learned this the hard way at 24, when she'd nearly signed a joint venture with a West African transport group whose books were immaculate, and whose operations were built entirely on exploited migrant labor. She'd caught it not through an accountant. She'd caught it because she'd visited the warehouse herself, unannounced, posing as a logistics intern. She'd watched the foreman speak to workers. She'd seen the locked dormitory doors. She'd understood in 40 minutes what 6 months of due diligence had missed completely. After that, she made herself a rule. Before I trust anyone with my company, I see how they treat people who can't fight back. So when Kang Shipping appeared on her desk, proposal polished, numbers clean, In-ho Kang's legitimate face carefully arranged across the front page, Kamaria read it twice, set it down, and told her team to hold. Her intelligence division had flagged inconsistencies. Ghost container routes. Port docking fees that didn't match cargo weight records. Financial transfers moving through 3 jurisdictions in under 48 hours. Nothing she could prove. Everything she could feel. She could have filed the proposal away. She had other deals. But the port infrastructure network In-ho was proposing was genuinely significant, East African access points that would accelerate Mensah Holdings' expansion by years. If he was truly restructuring, truly attempting legitimacy, the partnership made strategic sense. If That word was the reason she was on her knees in someone else's foyer. She spent 2 weeks constructing the identity, not a persona, a disappearance. She sourced the uniform from a discount market near Incheon Airport. She practiced flattening her English, softening the Ghanaian cadences that would make her memorable. No jewelry, not even the small gold stud she'd worn since her father's funeral. No makeup. Hair tied back without flourish. She entered the domestic employment agency as an undocumented worker seeking live-in placement, carrying forged references and a face designed to be forgotten. The plan was simple. 60 days of observation. In and out before anyone asked the right questions. 3 months later, she was still there. Because In-ho Kang was complicated. She had expected a predator. What she found was harder to read. He was restrained in a way that surprised her, quiet in meetings, firm but never theatrical, and notably respectful to staff in a way that felt less like performance and more like habit. He paid fairly. He remembered the housekeeper's name. When a junior staff member broke a piece of decorative porcelain worth more than her monthly salary, he told her to forget it and walked away. Kamaria noticed all of it. She also noticed the night shipments, trucks arriving after midnight on Thursdays, no manifest visible, unloaded into a wing of the estate's lower level that remained locked during daylight hours. She noticed the phone calls In-ho took standing at the garden's far edge, always in a language that wasn't Korean. She noticed the particular phrase that appeared in 3 separate conversations she'd overheard, clean passage, third route. It meant something. She hadn't decoded it yet. Was he changing? Or was he simply hiding his crimes inside the structure of a man trying to appear clean? She still didn't know. And that uncertainty was the thing keeping her in the gray uniform. Ji-eun, however, required no decoding at all. The cruelty wasn't dramatic. That was what made it so precise. It was the wine glass pointed at an unwashed corner. The pronunciation corrections delivered at full volume in front of guests. The food discarded if Kamaria's hands had touched it first. The comment at the Thursday luncheon, "You people should be grateful," delivered to a table full of nodding women who found it reasonable. Kamaria had absorbed it all without expression. Not because it didn't register. Because registering it was a luxury she hadn't budgeted for. She was here to understand In-ho. Ji-eun was simply the cost of the investigation. Then came Thursday afternoon. Ji-eun's voice, lazy and sweet, "You should come. It'll be amusing." The laughter from the doorway. The Cinderella comment. The casual cruelty dressed up as generosity. Kamaria had nodded and returned to her work. But that night, lying on the narrow mattress in the staff quarters were small enough that Kamaria could touch both walls if she stretched her arms wide. A single window. A narrow bed. A wooden chair with one leg shorter than the others. For 3 months, this had been her world. She sat on the edge of the mattress now, the sounds of Ji-eun's friends fading somewhere above her, laughter filtering down through the ceiling like smoke through a crack. She waited until it was completely quiet. Until she heard the last set of heels click across the foyer and the front door seal shut. Then she reached under the mattress and pulled out the burner phone. Kwame picked up on the second ring. "It's me," she said quietly. "I need you to bring the bag." A pause. "Which bag?" "The gray one. Diamond hardware. The one from the Paris vault." Silence stretched long enough that she pulled the phone from her ear to check the call was still connected. "Kamaria." Kwame's voice dropped low, the way it always did when he was genuinely concerned rather than performatively worried. "That's the crocodile Birkin. That bag has its own security detail. It travels in a temperature-controlled case. I know what it travels in. Do you know what it's worth?" $2 million, she said. "Yes." Another silence. Then, carefully, "You're taking it to the Kang party." "I am." She heard him exhale, the long, slow breath of a man recalculating. Kwame had been her head of operations for 4 years. He had seen her make decisions that looked like chaos from the outside and architecture from the inside. He had learned to trust the architecture. But this gave him pause. There are people at that event who will recognize that bag instantly, he said. The moment they do, your cover is gone. Everything you've built over 3 months. I know. This isn't a full reveal. Not yet. Kamaria kept her voice even. Just enough. Enough to crack the foundation. I'm not ready to close the file on Inho, but Ji-eun. She paused. She needs to understand what she was looking at. Kwame was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his tone had shifted, softer, almost careful. And the green dress? Yes. And come alone. No security team. Just you. She heard him moving already, the familiar sound of his office chair, the distant shuffle of preparation beginning. Transport will take 90 minutes from Dubai. I'll coordinate the retrieval and fly commercial to Seoul tonight. Dress will be pressed and ready. Good. Kamaria. He stopped. Are you okay? She looked at the wall across from her. She thought about the luncheon, you people should be grateful. She thought about the mispronounced words, the deliberate humiliations dressed up as corrections, the dinner she had served on her knees while Ji-eun's friends debated whether the hired help could understand the conversation. 3 months of lowered eyes. 3 months of silence chosen strategically, but silence nonetheless. I'm fine, she said. I'll see you tomorrow. She ended the call and sat there a moment longer in the dark. Then she stood, crossed to the small wooden chair, and picked up the faded gray uniform folded neatly across it. She held it for a moment, this small, shapeless thing that had made her invisible to everyone in that house. She smoothed it once with her palm. Then she laid it down carefully across the chair. For the last time. Sung-hyun had spent 14 years reading people for a living. Not their words. Their bodies. The way a man's shoulders rose half a second before he lied. The way a woman's eyes tracked the nearest exit when she felt cornered. Fear had a language, and Sung-hyun was fluent in it. Which was why Kamaria had been bothering him for weeks. He first noticed it on a Tuesday. She'd been carrying a tray of crystal glasses down the east corridor when one of Ji-eun's guests bumped into her without looking, without apologizing, without stopping. The glasses rattled. Kamaria steadied the tray in one clean motion, watched the woman walk away, and continued down the hall. No sharp breath. No stiffened jaw. No flash of anger quickly swallowed. Nothing. Just recalibration. Like a compass finding north again. He started watching more carefully after that. Her posture, for one thing. Household staff learned a particular kind of smallness over time, shoulders curved inward, neck bent, the body apologizing for existing in a room. Kamaria moved differently. She kept herself low when Ji-eun was present, yes, but the moment she was alone, something shifted. Her spine straightened. Her chin leveled. She moved through rooms the way someone moves through a space they are simply passing through, not one they are afraid of. Then there was the way she spoke. Measured. Precise. Not the careful speech of someone performing obedience, but the deliberate speech of someone choosing exactly how much to reveal. Once, near the kitchen, he'd overheard her explaining a medication dosage to one of the older staff members. The terminology was clinical. Accurate. Completely unremarkable, unless you were paying attention. He was always paying attention. He found her near the wine cellar the night before the party. She was inventorying bottles, back turned, moving with that quiet economy of motion that had been nagging at him for weeks. He waited until they were fully alone. "You're not poor," he said. She stilled. Not the freeze of someone caught, the pause of someone deciding. "I've spent my whole career guarding people who are afraid of losing what they have," Sung-hyun continued, keeping his voice low. Fear has a particular smell. He tilted his head. You don't have it. Kamaria set down the bottle in her hand and turned to face him. For the first time in 3 months, she didn't lower her eyes. I'm here to see who your boss really is, she said. Whether the things I've heard about him changing, are true. Or whether he's simply learned to hide better. The silence between them was careful. Sung-hyun had served in Hong Kong for 9 years. He had stood at the man's side through things he had never spoken about to anyone. Loyalty like that didn't bend easily. But he had also spent 9 years watching In-ho try, quietly and imperfectly, to become something different. And he had spent 3 months watching a woman endure humiliation without breaking, without flinching, without becoming cruel in return. He knew which one of them was worth protecting. He stepped aside. Then tomorrow, he said quietly, will be very interesting. Kamaria said nothing more. Neither did he. By morning, the Kang mansion had transformed. Florists moved through the halls carrying arrangements taller than doorframes. Catering staff arrived in pressed uniforms. A string quartet was rehearsing somewhere above the foyer, the notes floating down the staircase like a warning dressed in silk. The party was hours away. And somewhere across the city, Kwame was already on his way, with the bag. The Heritage Hall above the Han River had been built to make people feel small. That was the point of spaces like this, the coffered ceilings that swallowed sound, the gold chandeliers dripping light onto guests who had been carefully selected to reflect it back. A string quartet played near the windows overlooking the water. Silk tablecloths. Imported flowers. The kind of room that announced, before anyone opened their mouth, exactly who belonged and who did not. Ji-eun Kang had chosen it deliberately. She stood at the center of the hall in a floor-length red gown, greeting arrivals with both hands extended, her diamond-heavy smile working the room at full power. Politicians. Socialites. The wives of men whose names appeared in financial papers. Ji-eun collected people the way others collected art, for display, for value, for the quiet satisfaction of ownership. She was in complete control. And she was enjoying herself enormously. Do you think she'll actually come? One of Ji-eun's closest friends, champagne already in hand, Birkin already on the table, leaned in with barely concealed delight. Ji-eun laughed, touching her collarbone. Honestly? No. She'll lose her nerve by 7. Imagine if she did show up though. Another friend pressed her fingers to her mouth. What would she even wear? Something from a discount bin, the first one offered. Laughter rippled through the small circle like a current. You should have told her there was a dress code, someone said. There is a dress code, Ji-eun replied, lifting her glass. She just can't afford it. More laughter. Easy, comfortable, the kind that comes from never once having been on the other side of it. If she comes, Ji-eun added, waving her hand lightly, I'll have someone set a plate aside for her. My leftovers. A little gift. The circle dissolved into giggles. Ji-eun turned back to the arriving guests, satisfied. Tonight was hers. Every element choreographed. Every detail controlled. She hadn't given Kamaria a second thought since Thursday. Across the city, in a hotel suite that overlooked a different stretch of the Han, Kamaria stood before a full-length mirror. The emerald satin gown had been commissioned 18 months ago, a sole designer who worked exclusively by referral. It fell in one clean line from shoulder to floor, tailored to her exact measurements, the fabric catching the light with a quiet authority that needed no embellishment. Her hair was down. Soft, natural curls framing her face. No headscarf. No apology. A knock at the door. She opened it. Kwame stood in the hallway in a black suit, holding a gray box with both hands. His expression was somewhere between professional and barely suppressed laughter. The bag, he said formally, lifting the lid. The Himalayan Birkin sat nestled in tissue paper. Crocodile leather the color of storm clouds. Diamond-studded hardware catching every photon of light in the corridor. $2 million. Sitting in a hotel hallway. Kamaria looked at it for a moment, then looked at Kwame. No security, she said. Just you. Understood. He paused. Are you ready? She picked up the bag, turned back to the mirror one final time, and studied the woman looking back at her. Not a maid. Not a disguise. Not a performance. Just herself. Let's go, she said. At the Heritage Hall, the string quartet had shifted into something slower. The crowd was deep, warm, glittering. Ji-eun accepted a second glass of champagne and checked the door once, almost bored, almost certain, then turned away. The clock on the wall read 9:16. Outside, footsteps approached. The doors opened at 9:17. Conversation didn't slow. It didn't taper. It simply stopped. The way sound stops when something interrupts the frequency entirely. Even the string quartet lost the thread for half a bar before recovering, the violinists bow stuttering almost imperceptibly against the strings. Every head turned. Kamaria walked in. Not quickly. Not dramatically. She moved the way she always moved when she wasn't pretending, with the unhurried certainty of someone who had already decided how the evening would end. The emerald satin caught the chandelier light and held it. Her natural curls framed her face in soft, deliberate fullness. Her posture was straight. Her expression was calm. In her hand, resting against her side with complete ease, was a small gray handbag. The hardware caught the light first. A woman near the bar noticed it and touched her companion's arm. A man in a charcoal suit leaned toward his wife and said something quietly. Two socialites by the window turned to each other with the same expression, the look of people who have just seen something they cannot immediately explain. Then someone said it aloud. Wait. A murmur spread from the entrance like a stone dropped in still water. That's the crocodile Birkin. It can't be. The one from the Paris vault auction, I was there. That bag sold for over $2 million. The ripple reached the center of the room. Ji-eun had been mid-sentence with a politician's wife when she felt the shift. 20 years of social navigation had given her an instinct for rooms, and this room had just changed. She turned, champagne glass at her lips, following the line of every gaze to the entrance. Her smile stayed in place for exactly 3 seconds by muscle memory alone. Then her eyes found the face above the emerald gown. The champagne glass lowered. Around her, Ji-eun's circle had gone very quiet. The Cinderella jokes had evaporated. The leftover comments had dissolved. There was nothing left to say that wouldn't sound exactly like what it was, the silence of people recalibrating very quickly. Kamaria crossed the room. Each step was measured. Unhurried. The crowd parted with the instinctive deference of people responding to something they didn't fully understand yet but could feel. Ji-eun laughed. Too bright. Too fast. She stole it, she said, her voice carrying the brittle confidence of someone who needs the room to agree immediately. She looked around at her friends for confirmation. She must have, there's no other explanation. Someone call. I bought it, Kamaria said. She had stopped 3 feet away. Close enough to be heard. Far enough to be seen by everyone. In Monaco, she added. Pleasantly. Without heat. The room absorbed this. Ji-eun opened her mouth. Closed it. Then, from behind Kamaria's left shoulder, a man in a black suit stepped forward. His bearing was formal. His voice was clear and carried precisely as far as it needed to. Ms. Mensah, Kwame said, your table is ready. Ms. Mensah. 2 words. They landed in the room like a gavel. Across the hall, Ji-eun Kang had gone completely still. His eyes moved from the handbag to the woman holding it. From the name to the face. Something behind his expression shifted, recognition assembling itself piece by careful piece. He stepped forward slowly. "Mensah," he said. "As in, Mensah Holdings?" Kamaria turned to face him directly for the first time in 3 months. Her expression didn't change. "Yes, Mr. Kang," she said. "I came to understand who I was considering partnering with." The room hadn't recovered. It was still holding its breath, 200 people frozen somewhere between confusion and the dawning, uncomfortable awareness that they were witnessing something they would be describing for years. Waitstaff had stopped moving. The string quartet had given up entirely. Even the chandeliers seemed to lean in. Kamaria didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "For 3 months," she said, addressing the room with the measured ease of someone who had spoken to boardrooms and press galleries and hostile investors and had never once lost the thread, "I worked in the Kang estate. 6 days a week. I cleaned those floors. I served those rooms. I kept my eyes down and my mouth closed." She paused. "And I watched. No one moved. I watched who spoke to staff and who spoke at them. I watched who said thank you and who couldn't be bothered. I watched who needed an audience to be generous, and who was kind when no one important was looking." Her eyes moved across the crowd without hurry. Politicians. Socialites. Businessmen. Every face she had memorized over 3 months of invisibility, now seeing her for the first time. "Power," she said quietly, "reveals itself in how it treats people who cannot fight back." Then she turned to Ji-eun. Ji-eun hadn't moved. She was still standing in the center of the room in her red gown, champagne glass somewhere behind her now, both hands at her sides. Her expression had cycled through shock, fury, and something approaching genuine fear, and had landed, finally, on a rigid blankness that was working very hard to resemble composure. Kamaria stopped in front of her. "You invited me here as a joke," she said. Her voice was even. Almost gentle. "You wanted your friends to laugh. I understand that." She tilted her head slightly. "But you had me in your home for 3 months, Madam Kang. 3 months. A beat. You never once asked my name." The silence that followed was the loudest thing in the room. Ji-eun's mouth opened. Nothing came out. Kwame stepped forward and presented the document folder with both hands. Kamaria took it. Opened it. Let the room see the Mensah Holdings letterhead before she spoke. There was a joint port venture under consideration. Kang Shipping. Significant figures. Significant opportunity. She closed the folder. Was. Gasps punctuated the room like small detonations. Ji-eun moved. She crossed to In-ho in 3 quick steps and grabbed his arm with both hands, her composure finally fracturing completely. "Tell her to stop," she said, her voice dropping to something urgent and private that the silence of the room made completely public. "In-ho. Tell her to stop." In-ho looked down at his wife's hands on his arm. Then he looked at her face, the desperation in it, the entitlement beneath the desperation, the absolute certainty, even now, that the world owed her its cooperation. He had loved her once. He was sure of that. "You embarrassed yourself," he said quietly. Ji-eun released his arm. Kamaria didn't wait for more. She didn't deliver a final line. She didn't look back. She simply turned and walked away, unhurried, unbothered, the emerald gown catching the light one last time as she moved through the crowd that parted around her like water. The judgment in the room was swift and wordless. Heads turned away from Ji-eun. Conversations resumed in other directions. Within minutes, the crowd had reorganized itself entirely, new clusters, new focal points, as though Ji-eun had simply ceased to be interesting. She stood in the center of the Heritage Hall. Alone. Still in her red gown. The string quartet, after a long moment, began to play again. Nobody looked at her. The papers ran it on a Wednesday. Kang Shipping secures foreign partner following internal restructuring. The headline was clean. Corporate. The kind of language designed to make seismic events sound like quarterly planning. But Seoul's business community knew how to read between those lines, and within 48 hours the story had moved from the financial pages to the social ones, and then, quietly and inevitably, everywhere else. No one printed Ji-eun's name in connection with what had happened at the Heritage Hall. They didn't need to. The city already knew. Ji-eun left the mansion on a Friday morning. There were no dramatic scenes. No final confrontation. Just luggage moved by staff she had spent years ignoring, loaded into a car she didn't drive herself, disappearing through the same gate she had passed through 1,000 times believing it was hers permanently. The marble foyer, the one Kamaria had cleaned on her hands and knees for 3 months, reflected the morning light in silence. Sung-hyun submitted his resignation the same week. 9 years. He wrote 4 sentences. The last one simply said, "I believe my skills are better directed elsewhere." In-ho read it twice, set it down, and didn't contest it. He understood. Some things didn't require explanation between men who had spent years reading rooms together. He signed it. 2 days later, Sung-hyun appeared at the offices of Mensah Holdings' Seoul liaison branch. He carried nothing except a single folder of credentials and the same quiet watchfulness he had carried his entire career. Kamaria looked at the folder. Then at him. "You stepped aside," she said. "I did," he replied. "Why?" He considered the question with his characteristic stillness. "Because I'd spent 9 years protecting power," he said finally. "I wanted to spend the next part protecting something worth protecting." She hired him that afternoon. In-ho's dissolution of the Kang syndicate's criminal operations was not announced. It didn't happen in a press conference or a courtroom. It happened in a series of quiet meetings over several months, structured settlements, withdrawn operations, redirected capital. The kind of dismantling that leaves no single moment to point to, but produces a result that is nonetheless real. Whether it was Kamaria's withdrawal of the partnership that finally broke something loose in him, or whether it was seeing his wife clearly for the first time in that Heritage Hall, or whether it was simply the accumulated weight of years of trying to become something different, no one asked him directly. He didn't offer it. Kamaria never returned to the Kang estate. But 6 months after the gala, a foundation was registered in Seoul under the name Mosaic, a resource and advocacy organization for migrant domestic workers. Legal support. Housing assistance. Language programs. Emergency funds. The board was staffed almost entirely by former house staff. The opening ceremony was held on a quiet Tuesday morning. No chandeliers. No string quartet. Folding chairs in a community hall, afternoon light coming through plain windows, a table at the back with tea and rice cakes provided by one of the board members who had learned to cook in someone else's kitchen for 20 years. Reporters attended. One asked Kamaria why she had done it, the whole thing, from the service entrance to the foundation. She was quiet for a moment. Then she smiled, not the careful, measured expression she wore in boardrooms, but something simpler and more tired and more true. "Power hides best in silence," she said. "And cruelty always reveals itself when it believes no one important is watching." She looked around the room. Former staff. Translators. Young women with careful eyes and straight spines, sitting in folding chairs in a room that was entirely, finally, theirs. "I just made sure," she said, "that someone important was." The foundation's opening ceremony was held on a Tuesday morning in early spring. Not in a Heritage Hall. Not in a chandelier-lit ballroom above a river. In a community center in Itaewon, walls painted a clean pale yellow, folding chairs arranged in careful rows, the smell of fresh coffee and new paint still hanging in the air. Former house staff sat in the front rows. Migrant workers. Domestic employees. People who had spent years making other people's homes beautiful and had never once been asked how they were. Kamaria had chosen the venue herself. The reporters gathered outside afterward, as reporters do, recorders extended, questions already loaded. They wanted the story they had come with. The billionaire who went undercover. The maid who owned a $2 million handbag. The mafia wife humiliated at her own party. They had their headlines. They wanted the quote to complete them. Kamaria stood on the steps in a simple black dress, Kwame a precise 2 steps behind her, and answered what she chose to answer. "Why did you do it this way?" one reporter asked. "You could have done due diligence from a boardroom. You chose to scrub floors." Kamaria considered the question with the same patience she had given every question that year, the financial press, the investigative journalists, the profile writers who had all, in different ways, been trying to understand what kind of person does what she had done. "Power hides best in silence," she said. "Not hidden rooms or coded language, though there was some of that too." A brief pause. "But real power. The kind built over time. It stays quiet. It doesn't announce itself. It watches and learns and waits." She looked past the recorders for a moment, toward the entrance of the community center where 2 women from the foundation's new staff were carrying boxes through the door. "Cruelty is different," she continued. "Cruelty announces itself the moment it believes no one important is watching. It doesn't hide. It performs." She returned her gaze to the reporters. "All I did was become someone it didn't consider important." Another reporter, "And the bag? The Birkin? Was that calculated?" The corner of her mouth moved. "Everything I wore that night, I had worn before. The gown. The bag. My own face." She let that sit for a moment. "The only thing that changed was the room I walked into." Later, after the reporters had gone, Kamaria stood alone inside the community center. The chairs were mostly empty now. A few staff members moved quietly at the edges of the room, gathering materials, talking in low voices. She looked down at her hands. These were the same hands that had pressed a cloth into the corner of a marble floor on her hands and knees while a woman stepped over her without breaking stride. The same hands that had wiped a spot a second time, not because she had missed it, but because she was still watching. The same hands that had lifted a $2 million handbag in a heritage hall and let a room full of powerful people see, for the first time, what they had been standing next to all along. Nothing about them had changed. That had always been the point. Dignity is not something you put on for the occasion. It is not the gown. It is not the bag. It is not the boardroom title or the net worth printed beside your name in a financial column. It is what remains when all of those things are removed. Kamaria had walked into the Kang estate with nothing they recognized. She had carried it with her the entire time.
If you enjoyed the story this far, don't let it end here. Hit that subscribe button so you never miss the next chapter and enjoy more story from us. And if this story gave you chills, drop a like and share it with someone who loves powerful romance with a dangerous edge. Your support keeps these stories coming. Thank you.